Hello, curious minds. Welcome to this intellectual journey. Today, we're not focusing on the wheel or fire. Today, we're going to explore humanity's most powerful invention, one that allowed us to converse with the dead and build the future. A technology so revolutionary that, in essence, it made us immortal. I'm referring, of course, to the birth of writing, but not as we know it, not on paper or screens. I'm talking about the first code that hacked human reality. A system that was born in two cradles of civilization, Mesopotamia and Egypt, in very different ways, but with a consequence that changed everything forever. This isn't just a video about history. It's the story of how our minds learned to live outside our bodies. Are you ready to decipher the code that transformed us? Buckle up, because this journey will take us to the dawn of recorded consciousness, to the exact moment humanity learned to conquer oblivion. Before we start, I wanted to tell you something about the images you're seeing. To bring this narration to life, I've used artificial intelligence tools to generate the images. So think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and the atmosphere of what I'm telling you. They won't always be an exact or literal representation, but a visual accompaniment to let your imagination soar with me. I sincerely hope you enjoy it. To understand its impact, we must first travel to a world without it, a world of pure sound and memory. Imagine for a moment that you can't write anything, not a shopping list, not a message, not even your own name. The only hard drive that exists is your brain and your tribe's, a biological, fragile, and mortal hard drive. In this pre-literate era, history wasn't a record, it was an echo. Legends, knowledge, genealogies, everything depended on oral tradition. It was passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, from shamans to apprentices, in an endless game of telephone across generations. Each storyteller, intentionally or not, altered the story. They adapted it, embellished it, or simply forgot parts. Great epics and foundational myths were like rivers, changing course with each new voice, without a fixed channel to contain them. There was no definitive version of anything. Knowledge was limited and local. What a village knew about medicinal plants or canoe building died with its elders if a plague or war wiped them out. The death of a wise person was like the burning of an entire library, an irretrievable loss of data for the tribe. Law was the memory of the chief. Trade was based on trust and recollection. Large-scale social organization was almost impossible. How do you manage a city or an empire if you can't record taxes, debts, laws, or censuses? Human societal growth had a glass ceiling, the limit of human memory. This was the world, an eternal present where the past was a fog of myths and the future a repetition of the cycle. But then, in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something extraordinary began to happen. And it wasn't born from poetry, but from bureaucracy. The Sumerians, an incredibly advanced civilization, were building the world's first cities. Uruk-ur-Lagash, cities full of people, temples, and trade. And with trade and administration, a very modern problem arose. They needed to keep track of their accounts. They needed to know how many sacks of barley entered the temple, how many jars of beer were paid as wages, how many heads of cattle a landowner owned. Memory was no longer enough. The system was about to collapse under its own weight. They needed an external tool for memory. The solution was brilliant in its simplicity. They started using small clay tokens, a cone-shaped token for a measure of grain, a sphere for an animal. But carrying bags of tokens was cumbersome, so they took the next step. They started making marks on wet clay tablets that represented those tokens. At first, they drew a picture of the object, a drawing of a stalk of wheat for wheat, an ox head for an ox. This is called a pictogram, a system of picture writing. It was intuitive, but also slow and limited. How do you draw concepts like paid, debt, or love? This is where the real revolution happened. Sumerian scribes began to simplify the drawings. They used the tip of a reed to press into the clay, creating wedge-shaped marks. The drawing of the ox head became a few abstract wedges. Faster, more efficient. This new system is what we call cuneiform, which literally means wedge-shaped. The first fully functional writing system was born. The wedges no longer just represented objects, but also sounds, syllables. Writing had just made a quantum leap from the world of things to the universe of ideas. With this new tool, the Sumerians didn't just record harvests, they started writing everything, law codes like the famous Code of Hammurabi, which established justice for everyone, personal letters between merchants, peace treaties between cities. Society could now organize itself with an unprecedented complexity. And then the magic happened. Someone realized that this code for accounting and laws could be used for something more. It could be used to capture the echoes of oral tradition, to fix in immortal clay the stories that once vanished into thin air. And so literature was born, and with it, the first epic hero whose story wouldn't die with its storyteller. A king of Uruk who sought immortality and fought against gods and monsters. His name was Gilgamesh. His story, inscribed on 12 clay tablets, is humanity's first great literary work. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the definitive proof of this transformation. For the first time, a narrative had a fixed form. An author, though anonymous, could refine their plot, develop the psychology of their characters, create a complex narrative arc. Narration was no longer a changing river, it was a sculpture carved in time. Think about it. Thanks to those wedges in the clay, the story of Gilgamesh, his grief over the loss of his friend Enkidu, his fear of death. All those deeply human feelings speak directly to us almost 5,000 years later. That is a type of immortality. Cuneiform writing was the first bridge over the abyss of death. While the Sumerians were pressing their reeds into clay thousands of miles to the west, another great civilization was developing a completely different solution to the same problem of oblivion. On the banks of the Nile River, the Egyptians weren't looking to record commerce. They sought to speak with eternity. For the ancient Egyptians, earthly life was just a brief stop on a very long journey to the afterlife. Their entire culture was obsessed with death, or rather with life after death. And to navigate that perilous journey, they needed a language that the gods could understand, a sacred language. Thus, hieroglyphs were born. The word itself comes from Greek and means sacred carvings, and that's exactly what they were. They weren't for shopping lists, they were for temple walls and the interiors of tombs. Their purpose wasn't administrative, it was magical. Unlike abstract cuneiform, hieroglyphs were beautiful and evocative. A falcon, a cobra, an eye, a leg. They were images of the real world, but they weren't simple pictograms. This is a key point. The hieroglyphic system was incredibly sophisticated, a blend of several systems at once. Some hieroglyphs represented an object like the drawing of a sun to mean sun, but others represented sounds like our alphabet. The drawing of a mouth might not mean mouth, but the sound R. And others were determinatives, silent signs placed at the end of a word to clarify its meaning, like God or woman. This complexity made learning to write incredibly difficult. Egyptian scribes were an elite, spending years in special schools to master this sacred art. Being a scribe was one of the most respected professions in all of Egypt, a gateway to power. And the narratives they created with this system weren't about mortal heroes, but about gods and pharaohs who were considered living gods. The walls of temples like Karnak or Luxor don't just tell a story, they proclaim it. They narrate the pharaoh's victories in battle, his offerings to the gods, his divine connection. Narration here doesn't seek to entertain, it seeks to establish cosmic order. It asserts that the pharaoh is the guarantor of Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of order, truth, and justice. The story is divine propaganda, carved in stone to last an eternity and be read by the immortals. But the most fascinating use of hieroglyphs in narration is undoubtedly the so-called Book of the Dead. It's not a single book, but a collection of spells and magical texts, personalized for each deceased person, written on papyrus scrolls that were placed in their tomb. This book was literally a travel guide for the afterlife. The narrative was an instruction manual for the soul of the deceased. It told them what to say when encountering terrifying demons, the passwords to open magical doors, and the correct answers for the final judgment before the god Osiris. The story told by the Book of the Dead was the most important for an Egyptian. It was their own salvation story. The protagonist was the soul of the deceased, and the happy ending was reaching paradise, the field of reeds. Writing didn't just tell a story, it was a magical vehicle to make it come true. So we have two very different origins. Cuneiform, born from practical necessity and economics, which blossomed into the first epic literature, and hieroglyphs, born from faith and magic, which became a tool to guarantee eternal life. Two paths that converge on the same truth. The truth is that writing gave humanity an external memory, a memory that didn't deteriorate, that didn't die. For the first time, knowledge could accumulate. Isaac Newton famously said, "If I have seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants." Writing built those shoulders. An astronomer in Babylon could record the movement of a planet on a clay tablet. 100 years later, another astronomer could read that tablet, add their own observations, and correct or expand upon the knowledge. This is how science is born. It's born from a written dialogue across centuries. History itself, as a discipline, is impossible without writing. Before it, we only have prehistory, a silent past from which we can only infer through bones and tools. Writing is what turns on the light, what allows us to hear the voices of the past, their laws, their fears, their hopes. The impact on storytelling was total. Writing allowed for the creation of much more complex and longer plots than memory could retain. It allowed for the deep development of characters with motivations and arcs of transformation that were previously impossible to maintain consistently. Furthermore, writing created the concept of authorship. The story no longer belonged to the collective, to the tribe, It belonged to the mind that had imagined it and fixed it in a text. The idea of a canon was born of an official version of a story. Homer's Iliad isn't one of many versions, it is the version. This changed our relationship with knowledge and truth. A written story had an authority that the spoken word could never match. It is written became synonymous with it is true. This formed the basis for sacred texts, legal codes, and scientific treatises that governed the world. Cuneiform spread throughout the Near East, adapted by Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Hittites. It became the first international lingua franca, the English of its time. Kings sent each other letters on clay tablets that traveled thousands of miles. Hieroglyphs, for their part, evolved in Egypt into faster, more cursive forms for daily use on papyrus, such as hieratic and demotic script. But monumental hieroglyphs continued to be used in temples and tombs for 3,000 years, an astonishing record of longevity. Eventually, both writing systems disappeared. Cuneiform was replaced by simpler alphabets, like the Phoenician, and hieroglyphs fell into oblivion with the end of the Egyptian religion. For over 1,500 years, no one in the world could read these codes. Their secrets were sealed. The key to reopening this world was the Rosetta Stone, found in 1799. This stele contained the same text written in 3 systems: hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek. Greek, which was understood, was the key that allowed geniuses like Jean-François Champollion to decipher the pharaoh's code. The decipherment of cuneiform was a similar process, based on trilingual inscriptions from Persian kings. Suddenly, the voices of Mesopotamia and Egypt, silenced for millennia, spoke again. And the stories they told changed our understanding of the human past. They told us of a universal flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, centuries before the biblical version. They spoke to us of laws and civil rights in the Code of Hammurabi. They showed us an incredibly complex and poetic belief system in the Book of the Dead. They returned lost chapters of our own history to us. The invention of writing wasn't a single event, but a long process. But its consequence was singular. It divided human history into a before and an after. Before, we lived in a continuous present, tied to the fragility of memory. After, we began to build a past and plan a future. Writing gave us the capacity for reflection. By being able to read and reread a text, we could analyze it, critique it, improve it. Complex thought, philosophy, and science depend on this ability to examine ideas in a stable and permanent way. Writing gave us a new way of thinking. Today, we live immersed in an ocean of text, emails, news, books, programming code. We take this miraculous technology for granted. But every letter we type, every word we read, is a direct descendant of those wedges in the clay and those sacred carvings in stone. Every time you write a story, you're using the same power as the scribes of Uruk and Thebes. You're creating a small artifact of immortality. You're capturing a thought, an idea, an emotion, and giving it the potential to outlive its creator and travel through time. That is the true transformation of storytelling. It went from being an ephemeral performance to a durable object, from an echo in the air to a voice in stone. Writing didn't kill oral storytelling, it empowered it, gave it an anchor and a map to navigate the seas of time. The cuneiform code, with its practical origin, taught us that great stories can be born from the most mundane needs. It showed us that epic and adventure can be recorded, analyzed, and preserved, transforming a local king into a universal archetype of the human condition. Hieroglyphs, on the other hand, taught us that writing can be an act of faith, that words can have a magical and performative power. Their narrative didn't just tell a story, it actively sought to alter reality, secure a destiny, and speak a language worthy of the gods and eternity. Both systems, in their own way, solved humanity's greatest design flaw: the fact that our minds, with their entire universe of ideas and memories, are trapped in mortal bodies. Writing was the first successful attempt to back up human consciousness. This new ability to reliably store and transmit information across generations was the catalyst for what we call civilization. Complex laws, vast empires, cumulative science, profound philosophies. None of this is possible in a purely oral culture. Writing changed the very nature of thought. It pushed us towards greater abstraction and more linear, logical analysis. Reading is a very different process from listening. It requires a concentration and a type of brain processing that fostered new forms of introspection and critique. The next time you open a book or read an online article, pause for a second. Remember the long journey of that idea? From a voice around a campfire, to a wedge in clay, to a hieroglyph in a tomb, to an alphabet on papyrus, to a printing press, and finally, to the pixels on your screen. You are the heir to a 5,000-year-old tradition, a tradition that began with a Sumerian accountant and an Egyptian priest, and which today allows us to connect our minds across space and time in a way that would seem like pure and simple magic to them. The history of writing is the story of how humanity built its own memory, how it learned to weave the fabric of culture and science, and how it transformed fragile oral storytelling into an immortal art. It is, in short, the story of how we learn to leave an echo of our existence that will resonate for eternity. The ability to fix a narrative allowed for coherence and complexity. Stories could be edited, refined, and structured with a precision impossible to achieve in oral recitation. This gave rise to the first well-defined literary genres, from epic to religious hymn. Let's think about the fundamental difference. An oral story is a communal and performative experience. Its power lies in the presence of the storyteller, their voice, their gestures. A written story is an intimate and personal experience. The power lies in the silent relationship between the reader's mind and the absent author's mind. This intimacy of reading fostered a new type of narrative, one that could explore the internal psychology of characters. By reading the story of Gilgamesh, we don't just see his deeds, we access his existential anguish, his internal monologue recorded in clay. In Egypt, the written narrative of funerary texts created a very particular reader character, the soul of the deceased. The story wasn't meant to be enjoyed, but to be used. The success of the narrative was measured by the soul's ability to overcome obstacles and achieve eternal life. Narrative as a technology of salvation. Another radical change was the relationship between history and truth. In oral tradition, myths and factual history often intertwined without distinction. Writing allowed for drawing a line, though blurry at first, between historical record, the chronicle of facts, and literary fiction, the exploration of possibilities. The existence of a fixed text also allowed for literary criticism and commentary. Later generations of scribes could read, copy, and add their own glosses and interpretations to older texts. The history of literature thus becomes a written conversation across the centuries. The power of writing was so evident that it was often attributed to divine origin. The god Thoth in Egypt, with the head of an ibis, was the inventor of hieroglyphs and the scribe of the gods. In Mesopotamia, the goddess Nisaba was the patroness of scribes and writing. This divine association gave the written word immense power. It wasn't just communication, it was a creative act. According to some Egyptian cosmogonies, the world was created when the god Ptah spoke the names of all things. Word and existence were intrinsically linked. Therefore, written narrative, especially in Egypt, was an echo of that creative power. Writing down the pharaoh's victory wasn't just recording it, it was reaffirming it and making it perpetual on the cosmic plane. Writing a soul's name in the book of life was ensuring its immortality. Meanwhile, the logistical nature of cuneiform also influenced its narrative. Stories were often divided into chapters that corresponded to the size of a clay tablet. The physical format of the writing medium shaped the story's structure, creating natural pauses and turning points. The durability of baked clay compared to fragile papyrus or human memory is why we have such an incredibly detailed record of life in Mesopotamia. Their stories, their receipts, their customer complaints, everything was preserved in the earth, waiting to be read again. Writing also allowed for cultural translation. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originally Sumerian, was translated and adapted by Akkadians, Babylonians, and Hittites. The story could travel beyond its original language and culture, becoming the heritage of the entire Near East. The first globalized narrative. It's fascinating how these first two forms of written storytelling reflect the cultures that created them. The Mesopotamian, focused on city life, law, and human destiny on earth, gave us epic narratives. The Egyptian, focused on eternity, magic, and the relationship with the gods, gave us the sacred text. But in both cases, the result was the same. Writing freed the story from the chains of time and space. A story no longer needed its narrator to be present. It could be read in another city, in another country, in another millennium, by someone who never knew the author. This was the birth of humanity's hive mind. Knowledge was no longer a series of isolated puddles, but a growing river to which each generation could contribute its own flow. Writing was the technology that enabled this collective and continuous consciousness. The transformation of storytelling was, therefore, a transformation of consciousness itself. By externalizing our memories and stories, we created a mirror in which we could look at ourselves. We could see our past, analyze our present, and for the first time consciously design our future. Every writing system that came after, from the Phoenician alphabet to the binary code you're using to watch this video, is an optimization of that original idea. The idea that thought can be encoded, stored, and transmitted. An idea that was born with wedges in clay and drawings in stone. So cuneiform and hieroglyphs aren't just museum curiosities. They are the foundations of our civilization. They are the original software upon which our entire cultural operating system runs. They changed how we tell stories, and in doing so, they changed the story we had to tell. From a Sumerian king's quest for immortality to an Egyptian noble's soul guide, writing proved that a good story is the most powerful tool to defy oblivion. Writing transformed storytelling into humanity's ultimate legacy. Without these first attempts, without the desire to record a sheep or to pray to a god, human conversation would have been limited to a single generation. Today, however, we participate in a dialogue spanning 5 millennia, listening to the dead and speaking to those yet unborn. And that's the magic? Every time we read, we become necromancers, resurrecting voices from the past. And every time we write, we leave a small ghost of our own consciousness, patiently waiting for a future reader to bring it back to life. The birth of writing wasn't simply a technical advancement. It was the moment humanity realized that its stories deserved to outlive their bodies. It was the discovery that ideas, if given the right form, can in fact live forever. The next time you face a blank page or an empty document, remember the weight and power of that heritage. You're about to use the most revolutionary technology humanity has ever created, the ability to defy silence, to conquer oblivion. It's a tool that built empires, sparked revolutions, took us to the moon, and allowed us to understand ourselves. And it all began very humbly with the need to record a debt and the desire not to be forgotten by the gods. Cuneiform writing and hieroglyphs were the first 2 answers to the most human question of all. How can we leave our mark on the universe? How can we say I was here in a way that time cannot erase? Ultimately, the most profound transformation writing brought to storytelling was one of purpose. Stories ceased to be just for the present and for the ears of the living, and began to be for the future, for the eyes of posterity. They became our legacy. Thus, from clay and stone, humanity's library emerged. A constantly growing archive of our victories, our failures, our dreams, and our stories. A testament that even though our lives are brief, our voices, thanks to this code, can resonate forever. In conclusion, cuneiform and hieroglyphs didn't just invent writing, they reinvented what it meant to be human. They gave us a recordable past and an accumulable future, transforming the fleeting echo of storytelling into an eternal voice that continues to speak to us today. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey into the origins of the written word. It's a topic I'm deeply passionate about, and I hope you felt at least a fraction of the wonder that these ancient codes inspire. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What modern story do you think deserves to be etched in stone to last 5,000 years? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoy these kinds of deep dives into the history of knowledge, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.